President Buhari to confer national honors, GCFR, GCON, and President-elect Tinubu and Vice President-elect Shettima on May the 25th. Gbenga Akpabio warned lawmakers against rejecting APC's choices for Senate President and House of Reps Speaker. Zamfara's Governor Bello Matawalle under probe for alleged diversion of 70 billion naira from state treasury, says the EFCC. And outside of Nigeria, schools in southern Senegal suspended following protests over the opposition Usman Sonko's court trial. And 150 Western academics signed open letter calling for the release of Ghannouchi and other political prisoners in Tunisia. Tonight on PHQ, Tajuddin Karim Abisodun, the Honourable Member of the House of Reps representing Asibo, Shaki East and Shaki West Federal Constituency, and Omoshola Deji, a political scientist, will be my guest on the programme tonight. I'm Gbenga Aborowa. Stay with us, Politics HQ. We'll be right back. Some weeks ago, President-elect Bola Ahmed Tinubu gave Nigerians an inkling on the type of people he will be working with. In selecting my government, I shall not be weighed down by considerations extraneous to ability and performance. End of quote. The day for political gamesmanship is long gone. I shall assemble competent men and women and young people from across Nigeria to build a safer, more prosperous and just Nigeria, says the president-elect. As Nigerians look forward to an early announcement of Tinubu's ministerial cabinet, reports have pointed to some current ministers seeking a return. Nigerians are weighing on the issue and have suggested possible considerations the president-elect must take into account before selecting his cabinet. Who should be on Tinubu's ministerial list and what characters and competence should Nigerians be looking at? Joining me in Politics Headquarters tonight is Omoshola Deji, a political scientist. A warm welcome to you and thanks for joining me on the program once again.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Omoshola, what's the significance of the growing disquiet among politicians over secret moves by members of the president's cabinet to be appointed as ministers by President-elect Tinubu? I mean, it's not the first time we're seeing a party retain leadership. We saw the PDP transfer from former President Obasanjo to Yar'Adua, but there was no talks of ministers in the Obasanjo cabinet being retained in the Yar'Adua cabinet. Why are we seeing this, and what do you make of all of this lobbying by ministers? Some of them have spent 8 years in this administration wanting to be part of the incoming administration of Bola Ahmed Tinubu.
Well, being that the kind of premium we place on politics in our country, and because the incoming government is the same with the incumbent government, it is normal to expect that some of the stakeholders in the present government will want to be part of the incoming government because they would have worked.
Because they love to serve Nigerians, or they have a lot to offer?
Well, not really because they love to serve Nigeria, because like I said, the kind of premium we place on politics in Nigeria, being in power to the politicians is like an oxygen in nose-reels, because Nigerian politicians over time have been used to power. We are in a power-driven society. They cherish the power. They want it. They are used to it. Because with power in Nigeria, you can make things happen. You can
benefits to it.
Yes, you can use it to your own benefit. So it is normal for them to seek that continuation in office, either by some of them will want to seek it by appointments since they can no longer get elected. So it is quite normal in our polity for us to see that kind of rigorous lobbying. It is now incumbent on the president-elect to now sit down and ease himself off the pressure to make sure that he is able to appoint people that can take Nigeria from where it is to where it ought to be. But the lobby will go on. People will send emissaries, because if you look at the way Nigeria is today, I think for you to be kind of like super rich and super successful, for you to live a life of affluence, you can come under three occupations. Number one is entertainment. And when I say entertainment, you have to be the likes of Davido, Whiskey, Burna Boy, you know, or you are one movie star, you know. And another one is business. Business backed by government corporation, like the likes of Dangote, this man that owns Boa Cement. Now, the third one is politics, because you see people that can not afford some kind of lifestyle their life, and when they go into politics, you see that their life changed.
But that's an anomaly. You're meant to go there to serve the people, as it's seen in other parts of the world.
It is that anomaly that makes people, the thriving of that anomaly is what makes people want to hold on to power in perpetuity, because they know that, okay, for example, in Nigeria now, if they call anybody to come and serve, either as a president or as a governor, if it is a society that works, people ought to reject such offer, because you know why? There's a lot of problem in the polity. For example, why should anybody want to die to become a president of a country like Nigeria that is owing trillions of naira in debt? A country,
and you're using 96% of your income to service debt.
To service the debt.
So much obstacles.
Exactly. So why would anybody want to kind of like die, borrow loan, you know, whip up ethnic sentiment to become a governor when you know that you don't even have the capacity? But because politics comes with a lot of benefit, it comes with a lot of advantage in Nigeria. That is why you see that everybody wants to occupy one position or the other.
Now let's look at the current crop of ministers. Some of them resigned in the wake of the APC presidential primaries so they could contest. Looking at the last 8 years of the Buhari presidency, would you say any one of them deserves to come back? Have they performed exceptionally well in their field that they will be an advantage to the Bola Ahmed Tinubu administration? Do we have any star players, sort of a Messi or Ronaldo in the Buhari cabinet that Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu must surely get in order to a high-performing minister or ministers?
Well, to use your word, high-performing, if I'm to examine them based on the perimeter you've set, it will be very difficult for me to point out maybe two, because if you look at the sum of the whole administration itself, when the president was coming in, he campaigned on security, economy, all the indices on which he campaigned on. You know, we still have serious problems in those indices of development. So because those indices of development are faulty, and which each of these goalposts is manned by different ministers, what we have is perpetual underdevelopment, whereby things are not working and people are more in poverty than they were in 2015. So it will be difficult for me to kind of like score any minister high if I'm to look at some of the whole. But if I'm to look at it individually, the Minister of Works, Fashola, I would have loved to place him above board. But one thing of interest to me is not how many infrastructure you've built. I will take it further to compare the cost of those infrastructures to those in other countries of similar population, climate, weather, soil system, and all that. So if you compare the cost of building infrastructures in Nigeria, the real cost, you begin to wonder that why is it this expensive? If you look at Ethiopia, you look at Kenya, and you look at similar projects, you'll be so amazed that why is that of Nigeria so expensive? So you can be able to flag one or two kind of like strings of corruption in high places in that. So that wouldn't make me score him high. I would score him average. Now, the Minister of Labour, Chris Ngige, I would have loved to score him high. But
I mean, it wasn't also on strike for
his remarks,
8 months.
Some of his remarks, and his supporting minister, Festus Keyamo, right, is more political than being effectual
Doing
on the
his
job
work as a
that he
minister.
has been appointed for. And I really pity the man at the helm of affairs, the president, because I believe that if he has appointed you, he has put you in position of trust. If you are a governor, you can't be everywhere. So if you are putting me in a position of trust, then I should be able to deliver effectively for you. Look at the Ministry of Justice. Pure ineffectiveness, disobedience to the rule of law is quite rampant. Should we mention the case of Showore? Should we mention Nnamdi Kanu? Different kind of like cases. Should we mention the NSAS protest? Different issues that the Ministry of Justice and the Attorney General should have been more effectual. Look at these money, millions of dollars that they are trying to refund, and the Governors Forum is standing against. So imagine that kind of high-level seeming corruption at some of the highest offices in that. So it leaves you more to be desired. And like I said, the sum of the whole, because development comes in small bits. So at the end of the day, when each aspect, each minister delivers, what you have is overall development. But if you look at the health sector, look at different ministries.
Because tiny drops makes an ocean.
Exactly.
Yes, there's an argument by those who put forth, by supporters of those who feel some of those ministers that are advocating for continuity in the new government, they say they have experience, they have expertise, they understand the workings of the system. That if you bring a fresher into the system, it's going to have to go through the teaching process, and because of the level of problems we have in this country, you might not be able to afford that. So we need a minister that will hit the ground running. So therefore, they should bring one of those ministers that has been in the Buhari administration. What do you make of that argument?
Well, I don't quite agree with that argument, because experience is for a purpose. And the purpose of you having experience is for you to be able to perform credibly well in other similar endeavors of life that you found yourself. For example, the Minister of Works is a former governor of Lagos State. That's enough experience in terms of administration and governance. Rotimi Amechi, former Minister of Transportation, is a former governor in Rivers State. Godswill Akpabio of the Niger Delta Ministry is a former governor of Akwa Ibom State. So we have this former, X, and at the end of the day, with all this experience, similar experience, now you see that the nation is still in absolute comatose. Now, how do you measure the performance of government? I don't believe that we should be measuring performance of government by all these GDP indexes. No. What I want to see is the effect of governance in the lives of the oi polloi, the talakawas, the poor, the masses. And in Nigeria, if we have to be realistic with ourselves, if you pick the poor man, the poor of the poor, and you examine the impact of government in the life of the person, you see that it is missing. So what has experience brought us? The president himself is a retired military officer, right? Now, for
also
somebody,
a former president.
Yes, yes, soon to be former president. Now, he, as a former general, despite that we have large volume of insecurity in the country today. So what has that experience brought us? Experience should be at advantage in a country like Nigeria. But unfortunately, because the politics is, the way we play our politics is so different. There's so much influence. There's so much patronage. You scratch my back, I scratch your back. So that itself has not led the experience to work.
Now, talking about patronage, the Nigerian Constitution, 1999 Constitution, says you need to have a national spread in choosing your ministers. They must come from 36 states of the federation, different geopolitical zones. So how do you balance competence and also the role some of these people, individuals, ministers, played in you emerging as president? Some of them contested, they stepped down. There's a patronage system. I scratch your back, I scratch your back. How do you balance this if you're the president-elect with all the lobbying to make sure everyone is satisfied, not at the detriment of Nigerians. You look at competence, you look at, because, I mean, it's politics. You need to reward those that helped you to get there. So it's quite a task for the president-elect. How does he overcome this and make sure he gets ministers that will work in his best interest in keeping his campaign promises?
Well, that you are a good political mobilizer, that you can mobilize people to vote, doesn't mean that you are a good administrator or you'll be good in, if put in position of power and authority to govern a complex country like Nigeria. So I don't believe that political mobilization should be a criteria for appointment into offices. Now, having said that, every state in Nigeria has so much competent people. If the situation in Nigeria as it is today is what we regard as competence, that we need competence, I bet you that we'll find in every state of the federation, we'll find people that can perform better. If you go to Castina, you'll find tens, hundreds of people that can perform better than Buhari. If you come to Lagos, you'll find tens, hundreds of people that can perform better than Tinubu. So each state has people that can perform. And I agree with the framers of the Constitution that there has to be national spread in terms of ministerial appointment so that we won't have a situation whereby, you will have this kind of like, should I say, annoyance with a particular section of the country and you just sideline them. So for you to have ministers, there has to be this national spread that one must come
and the
from
Constitution enforces that.
And the Constitution enforces that. If the mistake that the framers of the Constitution had made is they perhaps should have said, should have extend that particular clause to the appointment of security chiefs. Because Nigeria today, as we have it, we have majority of the security chiefs for one particular
lopsided
region and religion. But if the framers of the Constitution had extended to the appointment of service chief, that would have restricted the president. But I believe that the framers of the Constitution feels that for you to emerge as a president, you would have some experience. You would have kind of like occupy some position that will enable you to operate with so much liberal mind in terms of appointment into sensitive position. But that has not been the case for the present government. And I hope the incoming government will not tread that out, because I don't want to see all Yorubas in the appointment of the service chiefs. I won't subscribe to that.
Now, Omoshola, do you think we're being too hard on ministers, knowing that a minister is just one person? And you look at developed countries like Switzerland and Singapore, their best minds are always in the civil service. So there's only much a minister can do, or do you think a minister is so powerful that that effectiveness can trickle down to those civil servants who work under him? Because he can't be everywhere at the same time.
Well,
and then the government doesn't operate like the private sector. You cannot say, oh, I have a crusade, that's why I didn't come up to work. Or you can't resume and then watch African Magic, watch Bollywood for 2 hours, send a copper to go and buy you amala, and then you start your business of the day. It doesn't work like that in the private sector. And there's long-term work security in the civil service. So even if you're annoyed with the staff, you can't hire and fire like the private sector. It works in a different system. So how can we rejig the civil service to respond to 21st century yearnings and aspirations, and also work in tandem with their ministers? Because the minister might have all those brilliant ideas, but you need the civil servants to execute.
Well, the thing is that if you look at Nigeria, you need credible hands in the civil service for the various ministries to work. I quite agree with you on that. But Nigeria is also largely a one-man functional state. What do I mean by that? The word of the person in authority, they look at the body language, the expression. So if the person in position of power is very effective, definitely it will trickle down. That's the kind of system we operate in Nigeria. We don't have this functional institution. So everybody is looking up to the behavior of his or her boss, and the people will follow suit. So we can't rule out the effectiveness of the ministers in the functionality of the ministry itself. Then if we are to have a functional ministry, I think it starts from the recruitment process. We operate a very dangerous system whereby we use recruitment into the civil service to compensate our brothers, our sisters, our uncles, and most unfortunately, political talks.
Competence.
Political talks. Because if you look at, I don't want to mention any state now, but we know states whereby there was so much violence during the gubernatorial election. And I was sitting down in an office recently, and I posed a question to someone, and the person said, oh yeah, that's true, unfortunately. Now, what is this trying to say? When times for recruitment comes, people only get into the civil service if their name is being dropped by a
political appointee.
By a political appointee or somebody holding one political connection or the other. So what do? When it's time for recruitment, they will now recruit people that are
foot soldiers.
Foot soldiers, political instrument, and use it to compensate them. My brother, how do we have an effective civil service
it's garbage in, garbage out? Now, one of the landmark legislations that President Buhari signed into law was to compel the president-elect and governors-elect to name their cabinets within 60 days. That law did not really say what the punitive measures will be if you fail to do so. Because Mr. President himself, it took him 6 months to name his ministers. I remember we went through a body language period and people said, you know, what do you need ministers for? Things are happening and the president is working. So what do you make of that law? And ideally, how long should it take one to name their cabinet? Because Mr. President-elect, I remember him speaking in Chatham House. People thought it was very brilliant because he delegated questions to some of his some senior officials that were there. And he says, you know, I'm a team player. I would delegate people to take responsibility. So he seems to be ready to hit the ground running when it comes to ministers.
Well, to answer your question about how long it should take for the president-elect to appoint his ministers, I think immediately after inauguration on May 29, he should name his ministers so that there will be no vacuum in government. For example, if there's no vacuum in the position of the presidency, God forbid, if anything happens to the president today, I'm sure this evening the vice president will be sworn in to avoid a vacuum in government. So if there's no vacuum in government, why should there be vacuum at the various ministries? Why should we use that?
Consultancy.
Why
Even
should
those
we use
guys that are
frustrate?
lobbying to become ministers, the president-elect has hardly spent time in Nigeria. But we don't know what he's doing abroad. And I believe all of this, his ministers and this list will be part of what he will be looking into. Yeah.
Well, I believe that the Constitution gave time after you have been declared president-elect. The Constitution gave you time for you to be sworn in for some reasons. And I think one of those reasons is for you to be able to articulate your policies, to be able to scout for those you can work with. So there is no excuse that a president will be inaugurated and 6 months, there is no cabinet. Which foreign investor will come and invest in a country that does not have a cabinet? So that is one of the failure of that's one of the reasons for the failure of the economy today. So the president-elect should, if possible, should from day one. For example, in South Africa, President Ramaphosa, immediately after he was sworn in, selected members of his cabinet. Government is continuum. There should be no vacuum. The vacuum leaves so much suspicion in the system. And now, what are you doing now as president-elect if you are not thinking about the country, if you are not thinking about your Federal Executive Council, if you are not thinking about people that you're going to appoint into key positions? Why should it be that it is when you have been sworn in that you now be thinking? And disappointingly, on the part of the incumbent president, when the list came out, it was same of the same. You know, there were barely any innovation. So what took him 6 months?
Wait for. They were expecting much better. But Omoshola, Deji, do stay with us. We'll go on a quick break. This is Politics HQ, and we've been examining the ministerial makeup for the incoming government. When we come back from this break, we'll be looking at developments in the National Assembly. Do stay with us. We'll be right back. You're welcome back to Politics HQ, a new central television. And in the first half of the program, we're discussing the upcoming ministerial list of the incoming president, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, the president-elect. And it's now time for us to switch gears to other issues and developments in the National Assembly. And I still have with me Omoshola Deji, political analyst. Thank you very much for staying with us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we've seen developments in the National Assembly. There's talks about zoning, and it's taken the front burner. The APC National Working Committee came out and said, look, these are the individuals you're going to vote for. They said they had a meeting with the president-elect, and they decided on this consensus candidate. From what we've seen so far, not everyone is happy with it. And when you have the definition of consensus is having the majority. So what do you make of this development in the APC? And is it democratic for the executive to be interfering in the affairs of the judiciary, of the legislature in choosing who its principal officers should be?
Well, it is not democratic. It is ultra-vires, beyond the powers of the executive to intervene, suggest, nominate, dictate who should occupy positions in the National Assembly. And I think that legislators in Nigeria should be given a refresher course on the functions of the legislature. They are to man the goalpost. They are gatekeepers. They are to scrutinize the executive. They are not like an appendage of the executive. No. But we've had a situation whereby the executive always try to dictate who occupies which position at the National and State House of Assembly. Now, the Vice President-elect, Senator Kashim Shettima, argued that the party had to intervene so that we would have religious balancing. And I kind of like disagree with that.
Why do you disagree?
The reason why I disagree is that I see him as being double-sided in the sense that when it favors you, the Muslim ticket,
you didn't
then
think of the balance,
it should be about competence. Nigeria should always look out for competence. We should not mind religion. But when it has favored you and it is now left for others to determine their own fate, then you, a beneficiary of that kind of system, is now advocating for religious equity, something that you didn't consider when you were nominated, and stand tall and say, no, for religious equity, I cannot deputize the APC presidential candidate. Please nominate a Christian. But having benefited from the system, I think that it does not qualify to speak when it comes to religious and ethnic balancing.
Now, Omoshola, I was speaking to the National Publicity Secretary of the All Progressive Congress on this program, and I asked him the same question. He said, you know, the executive and legislature don't have to antagonize each other, and more so, both are from the same party. So in order to approve and, you know, pass legislation on programs that were in the APC manifesto, it's very important that the executive also has a say in who emerges as the principal officers in the legislature, so as to have a sort of synergy and make things work so they can fulfill their promises and fulfill their promises to the people. What do you make of that?
Well, it is not necessary that they have a say, because the say, in quotes now, is we are building autocracy on democracy. So we are having autocratic democracy. What do I mean by that? We are operating a system whereby the party would dictate. That only happens in an autocratic system, that you dictate. Now, don't mistake me. Zoning is fine. You can zone for equity, right? So that other regions of the country, based on our ethnic sensitivity, can benefit in the power sharing. That is good. But for you to now narrow down to individual selection and say, this is who we want. Now, that is autocracy. That is not democracy.
So you can leave it open to the zone.
Yeah, you can zone and leave it open among the senators from that particular zone for them to kind of like sell their ideas to their fellows, honorables, and senators elect. That is democracy. But when you now state that we want a Godswill Akpabio, we want so person, that is autocracy. So now you are using autocracy, you are practicing autocracy and now ratifying it with a democracy. That is autocratic democracy. And that is what we have in the primaries. It is not only at the National Assembly level. We will have people, godfathers, incumbent governors, party chairman, impose candidates on the political party and now send send that candidate out for election. That is autocratic democracy. And at the end of the day, that may bring trouble for the APC itself, because in a country like Nigeria, it is very difficult for you to convince people to drop their aspiration. For example...
We'll get to that.
Okay.
We'll get to that. Now, interesting juggling act for the APC. How does the party balance the need to select candidates for National Assembly leadership positions based on merit and qualifications, with also the importance of regional and demographic representation in the leadership, hence the zoning, like you alluded to, that you're not against it. So how do you balance competence and leadership qualities and also the need to have a...
Good question.
A demographic spread?
A very good question. Now, if you wish to zone the office of the Senate President to a particular zone, now, take a list of the senators elect from that zone. Be sure that you have credible people from that particular zone that can vie for the position and let the best person emerge. You can individually, as a party chairman, support whichever candidate you like for the position. But for you to now state your own personal interest or the interest of the, of a cabal as the position of the party, that is wrong, because the party is not your property. The party is a public enterprise. It belongs to everybody. Everybody has a stake in the party. So when you look at a particular zone and you see that, okay, you may not have too much of competent people from the zone, or maybe most of the senators from the zone are facing corruption charges, or their antecedent in public office is not sellable, you can look at another zone and zone it elsewhere. For example...
Yeah, that's if you're thinking of the overall best interest of the country.
Yeah, that is how, to answer your question, that is how we can have good governance. You need to, first of all, look at the overall best interest of the country, the larger picture. Then you now move to the geopolitical zone. Then you now look at each of those 6 zones. Then you minus the zone that has produced the president. You minus the zone that has produced the vice president. You are left with 4 zones. Now, out of those 4 zones, the Senate president can come from any of that. Now, before you zone, look at each zone by merit and see which one is best qualified. For example, one thing to consider is, in the Buhari administration, which zone is less represented? You might want to use maybe the North Central or the Southeast. Now, if you now look at those zones, you have to be sure that you have sellable candidates of impeccable character.
Yeah, but there's also the question of how much votes did this region bring? How much did you contribute to my emergence as president?
Well, I don't think I don't think how much a zone contributed to the emergence of a president, which is another arm of
Say
government.
you want to reap where you did not sow.
No. I strongly disagree with that position because these are different arms of government. If the president did not get so much vote from for example, from the southeast, does that mean that if the best material for that Senate president is from the southeast, automatically they should be disqualified? Is the southeast not part of Nigeria? Is the north central not part of Nigeria? Then, like I said earlier, this is ultra vires. It is beyond your powers as an executive for you to want to dictate what will happen. It's like you dictating for me as a lecturer where your exam question should come from. That is beyond your powers. It is my prerogative.
Now let's look at the maths before we move on to very important issues in the National Assembly. The APC, looking at the maths, they have 177 members of the House of Representatives, while the opposition parties have 181. The current situation bears similarities with the 8th Assembly, where Yakubu Dogara and Lasu Yusuf teamed up with the opposition in 2015 and won against the anointed candidate Femi Gbajabiamila and Mohammed Monguno. What should the APC do? Because they're dissenting voices. There are other people that say, look, I'm as competent, I don't agree with this zoning agreement. What should the APC do to avoid a repeat of what happened in the 8th Assembly?
Good question. What the APC should do is to liberalize the system. Let people be able to kind of like express their views. Let them pursue their ambitions. Ambition is a lifelong thing. Imagine you being a senator-elect and you have this idea. You've been dreaming. What success means to you. Success, anyway, is a relative term. What it means to you is different from what it means to me. So if what success means to you is to become a Senate president, for some people to now sit down and now want to bury that your idea, that your dream, that can make you revolt against those people and against the party itself. And it only shows that the APC have not learned its lesson. Because if they present a candidate that is not sellable for the Senate president and his deputy and the Speaker of the House of Rep and the deputy as well, we may have a situation whereby one of the APC candidates for that position that was not selected might strike a deal with the opposition party members, whereby you would see that if the opposition decide to go in one direction and that particular candidate is able to secure like a tiny fraction of vote from his party, that kind of person would eventually emerge. For example, Orji Uzor Kalu, former governor of Abia State, for example, ruled Abia State as a PDP governor. Now you have selected Godswill Akpabio as a party. If, for example, Orji Uzor Kalu decide to go and team up with the PDP and Labour Party and promise members of those political parties what they call juicy committees in the Senate and is able to secure their loyalty. Orji Uzor Kalu, as a strong politician, has his own loyalist from the APC as well. So we might see a situation whereby the interest of the party would have been jeopardized. But if we don't have that kind of imposition, if we have a kind of like negotiation, you see, at the end of the day, this candidate may be able to dialogue among themselves and come up with a position. But it is too early for you to kind of like want to say, okay, who we want is Godswill Akpabio. And the Constitution does not say that because you are the ruling party, the Senate president must come from that particular political party. No. So why are you taking a risk as a political party to now twist, to now kind of like dictate to your members, whereby at the end of the day, they can go against your wish on the floor of the Senate, and at the end of the day, they can decide to cross carpet to another party and even give the president-elect a tough time. And that is why the president-elect must be very careful. He should be able to allow people to benefit from what he benefited from. For example, sorry, my brother, the incumbent president, Muhammadu Buhari, if he happens to practice autocratic democracy, I'm sure Tinubu will not be the president-elect today. So yes, the president-elect must move away from his regular position, his serial antecedent of wanting to dictate, to impose people into political offices, because, for example, since he left the office as governor of Lagos State, he has dictated who occupies that office. Now, Lagos State is different from federal. The politics of the federal is different. We have different interests. We have different strong political gladiators. We have people that, can dare the devil, or, if you like, can dare the Daniel. So if you are now operating at that stage, you need to change your strategy and know that what works in Lagos, whereby you dictate virtually everything from top to bottom, may not work at the federal level. So I think the president-elect should at least be able to let other people benefit from what he had benefited from to emerge president.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure.
Deji, Omoshola, always a pleasure.